The evolution of the theory of creative destruction towards the 2025 Nobel in Economics. 1. Origins. Early intuitions and terminological seeds. Long before the formal theory of creative destruction, thinkers in political economy and sociology had noted how economic systems evolve by replacing old structures with new ones. One of the earliest uses of a related phrase appears in Werner Sombart's Der moderne Kapitalismus, early 20th century, where he spoke of capitalism's tendency to break, reinvent, and supersede its own institutions and firms. Karl Marx's analysis also carried proto-elements. The idea that capitalist development involves cycles of accumulation and destruction, crises and renewal. Over time, these scattered insights would be synthesized and sharpened. 2. Schumpeter's canonical formulation, 1930s, 1940s. The modern recognizable theory of creative destruction is most closely associated with Joseph Schumpeter, particularly in Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, 1942. In his view, capitalism lives in a perpetual flux. Entrepreneurs and innovators introduce new products, methods, or organizational forms that render older ones obsolete. This simultaneous creative and destructive force is not a bug, but the essence of capitalism. Schumpeter contrasted static competition, firms competing on price, status quo, with dynamic competition, new entry, novelty, disruption. He argued that economic growth is not simply about optimizing existing structures, but about incessant renewal. However, Schumpeter's model remained somewhat qualitative and narrative-driven rather than formal and quantitative. 3. Mid-century transitions from narrative to formalism. After Schumpeter, the mid-20th century saw economists more focused on equilibrium, growth accounting, Solow, Herod, and comparative statics. The narrative of creative destruction receded somewhat in mainstream growth models. Yet, on the margins, evolutionary economics and neo-Schumpeterian thinkers began reviving the creative destruction idea. They sought to make innovation endogenous, i.e., driven by R&D, incentives, institutions, rather than exogenous. By the 1970s, 80s, scholars like Christopher Freeman, Richard Nelson, and Bengt Lundvall developed the notion of national innovation systems, emphasizing linkages among firms, universities, and the state as a systemic engine of continuous change. This was part of widening the lens beyond individual entrepreneurs to systemic structures that enable creative destruction. 4. Endogenous growth theory and Schumpeterian growth models. In the 1980s and 1990s, the endogenous growth literature, Romer, Lucas, etc., reintroduced innovation as a driver of long-run growth. Building on that, economists developed Schumpeterian growth models in which the destruction of old technologies is integrated into formal models of growth. Among the key contributions are Philippe Aghion and Peter Howitt, with others, who formalize growth through creative destruction models. In these models, firms decide whether to innovate. Entry is possible, and old firms are displaced, generating a balance between entry-driven growth and exit-induced destruction. Such frameworks lend clarity to policy levers, R&D subsidies, competition policy, and transitional dynamics, how fast creative destruction occurs. These models translated the intuitive insights of Schumpeter into tractable mathematics, enabling predictions, comparative statics, and empirical testing. 5. Empirical and network evidence, confirming cascades of replacement. While theory matured, empirical work sought to validate the stylized facts of creative destruction. For example, studies of world trade data have found that when new products appear, existing products tend to disappear in cascading waves, evidence consistent with the concept of creative destruction. Other quantitative and network models, e.g. Schumpeterian economic dynamics in minimal models, have shown how economic systems might alternate between stability and sweeping shocks of transformation. These empirical insights strengthen the theoretical narrative, showing that creative destruction is more than metaphor. It is observable in real economies. 6. Policy challenges and institutional barriers. Over time, scholars realize that creative destruction is socially and politically fraught. Incumbent firms, vested interests, labor dislocation, and regulatory inertia can resist disruptive innovations. The theory's dynamism must thus be mediated by institutions, competition policy, social safety nets, and intellectual property regimes. The evolving theory thus integrated political economy, institutional design, and growth models. How to sustain creative destruction without excessive disruption. The 2025 Nobel announcement itself emphasizes that growth cannot be taken for granted. Societies must uphold the mechanisms underlying creative destruction, lest stagnation take hold. Thus, the theory's evolution has moved from pure disruption narratives to frameworks that balance dynamism with stability and innovation with equity. 7. The 2025 Nobel Prize. Culmination and synthesis. In 2025, the Nobel Prize in Economics was awarded to Joel Mokyr, Philippe Aghion, and Peter Howitt for their collective work on innovation-driven growth and creative destruction. Mokyr is recognized for his historical approach, identifying the prerequisites, scientific culture, transmission of knowledge, mechanical competence, for sustained growth via technological progress. Aghion and Howitt are cited for advancing the theory of sustained growth through creative destruction, translating the concept into formal, testable models. The committee emphasized that these contributions deepen understanding of how economies continuously renew themselves, and by extension, how growth can falter when innovation is blocked by entrenched power or weak institutions. Thus, the 2025 Nobel is not just a recognition of past theory. It's a recognition that the theory of creative destruction has matured, being both historically grounded, Mokyr, and formally precise, Aghion and Howitt, and is central to managing future economic transitions. 8. Forward outlook. Creative destruction in the 21st century. Looking ahead, the theory continues evolving. In the 21st century, new challenges emerge. Digital platforms and superstar firms. Some firms grow so large that they resist being destroyed. How does creative destruction operate in such environments? Artificial intelligence and automation. Disruptive potential is accelerating. Modeling the pace and social consequences is key. Climate transitions and green innovation. Replacing carbon-intensive industries with new ones involves creative destruction at a planetary scale. Inequality and displacement. How to combine dynamism with fairness, retraining, and institutional adaptation. The 2025 Nobel underscores that creative destruction remains a living theory, one that must adapt to the shifting terrain of technology, institutions, and global challenges. If this journey through the evolution of creative destruction inspired you, then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. From Schumpeter's timeless vision to the 2025 Nobel recognition, this story reminds us that progress is born from reinvention, and that every ending sparks a new beginning. Stay tuned for more fascinating stories on how ideas, traditions, and innovations evolve through time, shaping our world one revolution at a time.